Well, howdy ho there, folks. How are we doing today? Hopefully, you're all doing absolutely peachy keen, fantastic, wonderful, all that great stuff. Today, we're playing a little bit of Warhammer Total War 3 as the Empire. In particular, we're playing as the Golden Order because I just think that being close to Abraham is really cool. So, I did a post a little while ago, I think it was last week, about asking folks, hey, what did you want more of? Did you want more Warhammer content? Did you want more spiritual content? Did you want whatever? And some people voted for more Warhammer content. So I decided I would do more Warhammer content because I really like Warhammer. Thing about that is, I personally really enjoy Warhammer Fantasy. Warhammer Fantasy much more than Age of Sigmar, and I definitely enjoy it still more than I enjoy Warhammer 40k. I think that Warhammer Fantasy is probably my favorite setting of the three, and it has a lot of really cool elements in it. And I actually have here in front of me 3 of the old Empire Army books that we got. I got 5th edition, 6th edition, and 7th edition. 6th edition is probably one of my favorites. And 6th edition is my favorite army books from just about all of them because they all had a lot more of lore and they kind of had like a horror story element going on with a lot of them, which I personally think was pretty cool. There's also like this is when the look of Warhammer really kind of changed and went for like a more grimdark, and like 5th edition had much more of like the bright colors and it had all the like pretty pictures and stuff in it, and it kind of the cartoony art style, which I still think is pretty cool in all honesty. But it's 6th edition where we really get that kind of dramatic shift into a different style. We have a lot of interesting differences between these different codexes. One of the things I really like about Warhammer Fantasy versus the other two in particular is that everything feels much more set. There are places that you can go to that feel like they're important to the overall story. 40k, partially just because of its size, it's kind of harder to do that. There's just so many planets that it's kind of like, well, if any individual planet falls, is it really that big of a deal? And I would argue that's really not that big of a deal, or at least it doesn't feel like it's that big of a deal. Where, with the siege at Prague, it's like, okay, if Prague falls, so much of the world is going to be devastated by chaos warriors and things like that. And I think that's just right off the bat a kind of a cooler thing and a thing that's more interesting. It also has this setting that feels, because it feels so much more solid, you get characters that feel to me much more interesting and kind of solid. The problem with characters in a setting like Age of Sigmar or Warhammer 40k is that they tend to be kind of more all over the place, and it kind of starts to feel more like, well, yeah, in the grand span of the galaxy, you can get these crazy, remarkable figures. Whereas in something more like Warhammer Fantasy, everything feels grounded and more grounded, and it feels like you can't just be like, and then there was a Titan, because you can't just have a Titan all over the place in Warhammer Fantasy, which is one of the things that I personally think makes it a lot more interesting, actually. I think that the problem with something like Warhammer 40k is that it's so over the top that eventually nothing actually feels like it's that over the top, because everything just kind of feels like it's, just some random junk that it just got summoned up into a particular moment or whatever. So I don't, it's not as easy to care, because it's like, okay, well, oh no, Creed dies and now we just have Ursula Creed. Okay. Whereas if a character dies in Fantasy, which they didn't do very often until the end times, and the end times are patooey bad. Bad. But yeah, I also really like the Empire in particular. The Empire is my favorite faction, and I think part of the reason for this, one of the things that I think really helps give Warhammer Fantasy just a little bit of character is having all these nations in this world in a fantasy setting being based entirely on, like, well, not entirely, but like heavily influenced by real world cultures and civilizations. Like if you read about the Empire, it's a mishmash of a bunch of things with the Holy Roman Empire, which personally I find that the Holy Roman Empire is probably one of the most interesting parts of history to me, especially Germanic history. I'm a big nerd for that kind of stuff. I really enjoy it. It also has such a look that is, very historical, but in a fantasy setting is very unique. It has that kind of Renaissance German look to it. So everybody has these big hats, stockings, and cod pieces, as silly as that is, and all this kind of stuff. But it also has these symbols like the sun, which becomes very prominent, and skulls are very prominent, and it does make it a little bit more kind of grim and things like that. But it still feels, to me at least, a little bit more light than something like 40K, and it really delivers on a lot of those things. I also really like that the Empire is one of those places where you can kind of soup different things, especially in like Warhammer Army projects. I doubt they're going to do that with the old world, but definitely with like Warhammer Army projects and some of the older books, like the fifth edition codex, you could bring dwarves and ogres, and like with the sixth edition codex, you still had the ability to bring dogs of war, which is, I personally think, pretty cool. And just the art and the way everything is represented, it's kind of has almost this like, at times, almost like slightly post-apocalyptic feel to it, and it's kind of interesting to see how much you can actually change things. And another thing that's interesting, since I have these three codexes, is that you can see from fifth to sixth, they stopped letting you take dwarves and ogres, but you still have the ability to take dogs of war. And the sixth edition ogre codex had a bunch of dogs of war stuff. A lot of your units could be taken as dogs of war. But in the seventh edition codex, there's not like an allowance in this area for any dogs of war or anything like that. Everything became much more streamlined, and single armies would have like just their units, and you couldn't bring a whole lot of other stuff. I personally liked it though when it was more soupy and you could bring all kinds of different stuff. Basically, I've always just loved really soupy armies where you bring lots of different kinds of things and they like work together. It's probably the reason I like the concept of the Tau, even if I don't necessarily like the way the Tau actually play on the tabletop. And I think that the Tau on the tabletop do get a little bit weird sometimes. And you can kind of see, even with just like a little bit of development, like the Empire has this spirit and this flavor about it that I think a lot of other fantasy settings just don't. It feels distinct, it feels unique to me. And some people would say that it's not really that unique, that it's very similar to other human kingdoms and other games. And I kind of understand that, but at the same time, I would say that very little elicits the same feelings to me, and especially just like looking at the units and looking at the troops that you have, like the is just very cool to have like a gunpowder army like marching along, and there's also like crazy knights, and there's like flagellants, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on, and it really forms this kind of interesting dynamic and this interesting thing where it's like you can have all of these different kinds of units. Like you can have like the engineers and the more technologically advanced units, you can make those like really the focus of your army, but you also have like magic, like Magnus the Pious and Teclis established the colleges of magic, and since then they've been a powerful institution within the Empire of Man. And there's also been just the regular rank and file soldier. You can go for a Steerland kind of army, which is lots of spearmen and archers. And like they have like a lot of these cheaper soldiers, but like like the brave woodsmen of that particular group. Or you could also have just like a bunch of religious fanatics. And I think it's really cool that they have like all these different kinds of things. And they have even more if you want to get like into individual provinces. Averland is personally my favorite province. I think they look really cool with the black and yellow. I think that looks really cool. And I think that it's really interesting to see this civilization that is like constantly like having things pushed back against them. Like there's the Beastmen, there's the Chaos Warriors, there's corruption from within, there's orcs and goblins, and there's also all kinds of crazy politics going on within the Empire, but you can still see like that there's some good underlying, and that there are people who are trying to make it work, and that it can fight against these much grander threats. For instance, here I'm fighting against, ogres in the video, and I can tell you that it feels really cool to kind of have this, like, at least slight underdog army that, like, through, like, sheer force of will and, like, the strength of their, like, coming together, you get, like, this just really, really cool, unique feeling set of armies that are, so very important to, like, forming this interesting civilization. And it's also kind of cool because if you read the novels, you can see that they do have contact with civilizations like Araby and Estalia and all the way down to Cathay. There's trade with Cathay and Nippon and all kinds of interesting stuff. Like, so it is, in a way, like, the trade is very like, expansive. And it's kind of interesting because if you read about medieval and Renaissance history, you would know that there was actually a decent bit of contact between, like, all these crazy different parts of the world and, like, Europe and the West. And I mean, at the time, as Europe was advancing and becoming more capitalistic, it was kind of advancing from, like, a set in the world of being, like, kind of the underdogs and being, like, at the bottom of the kind of the bottom of the pecking order to, like, reversing that. But that's a whole discussion for another time. I do think that it is very interesting to see all these different stuff coming together. And I also like that, if you're not necessarily into, like, the red and white and, like, the kind of snootiness of, like, Reichland, you can go to any other province and get people that basically, live almost in a different country. They have, like, such a different view on things. And there's also the whole thing that's very cool about them having, like, Sigmar, but also, like, this whole pantheon and, like, how it all kind of works together. And, like, all of the different factions within the Empire and how they, like, kind of have to work together and have to make sure that they they can stand up against, like, the negativity and all the bad things in the world and kind of become this almost, like, world power in a way. It's very cool. I think it's very cool anyway. I really, really enjoy it. It's easily one of my favorites. And the other thing I really love about it is that it feels so established. The more you read about the lore, the more you can kind of get a feel for the way Empire towns are. You can get a feel for the way that, citizens of the Empire, kind of work together, and, like, how, like, maybe some are much more prejudiced than others, and then others are kind of cool. And there's, like, there's lots of things. There's, like, oh man, we don't really let our, we don't want to deal with mutants and things like that. But there's also people in the Empire who are compassionate. Like, there's the healers of Shalia and all that great stuff. And there's just so much flavor in this one country army that it's really, really cool to see. Now, what I would personally like, and they're not going to do this with the old world. In fact, I'm not sure what the hell they're doing with the old world, really. But what I think would be really cool is if we got some of that for, like, Araby or Cathay or just a lot of the other factions. Because I think the Empire is easily my favorite. But I think that the Empire also has a couple of things where it's like, well, they're not necessarily the good guys. I saw a Discourses video where she's talking about, like, oh, well, they're not all good guys and they do a lot of bad things. It's like, I mean, sure, but I'm going to be honest with you. I think that the Empire has a lot more good guys in it than some folks give it credit for. And I think that, just the strength of arm and just, like, this classic thing where men and women of the Empire fight, and, like, you can see those Empire spearmen, by working together, were able to take out, like, all these ogres, and they managed to kill all these different things, which, by the way, let me just do this for them real quick. Clap, 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 clap. We must clap for them. They're so good. Such good boys. Such good boys and girls. I do wish I had more, like, female Empire Trooper models and, like, availability in this, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, I think it would be really cool if we got this for some of the other factions, if we got, like, some of the same level of lore. But you can tell that Empire is where a lot of their heart was, and but by no means do the other factions really suffer from that. At least not the ones that you can play on the tabletop. They're just so cool. There's just like so much going on with the dwarves and with the elves, and they all have this really complex, intricate history that all kind of works together. And it's like, wow, that's actually really cool. It's really cool to see all these different things coming together. I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons I like the Empire as a faction, though, is I like that they are all of these different provinces, all this different crazy stuff going on, and then they kind of mush together to make a really cool, powerful army. I think that's really cool. Anyway, that's just what I wanted to share for a little bit. I just wanted to gush about the Empire because they are easily one of my favorites, and I think they're probably one of my favorite armies in all of fiction, honestly. And I think Warhammer Fantasy is as cheesy as it is sometimes, as over the top as it is sometimes. I think it really is some of the best dark fantasy stuff I've read, and I really, really enjoy it. I really enjoy the times where it's silly, but I also really enjoy the times where it has like this kind of like grimness about it, but it also has like this ability for like the grim determination of these troops to like fight and go and work together, and like you can see like the covenant kind of aspect of like all these different groups of people coming together. Like there's dwarves and elves and ogres and halflings all across the empire and all working together and all fighting under the same banners. And I just have to say, I just think that's just real cool. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed listening to me gush about the Empire for a little bit. And yeah, thanks for stopping by. If you have a faction you want me to go over next, go ahead and leave it in the comments, all that fun stuff. And yeah, if there's anything you guys want in particular for videos, let me know. Go ahead, like, subscribe, all that silly stuff. And I hope that you have an absolutely wonderful day. And okay, bye. I love you. Bye. God loves you. Bye.